In this video, we're going to create a 3D text intro using Maya and the star background from our robot composite in After Effects. Starting in Maya, we'll introduce a text element. Holding down the spacebar, going to create, clicking on type. By default, Maya will drop a 3D component into the composition in the form of a polygon. And to edit that to what we want, we would go to the attributes and click on type 1. And in this window, we have everything we need to create the 3D intro text that we want to use for our BattleBot composition. I'll start by selecting through the type and hitting my cap lock, and I'll type in battle, and I'll hit return, and I'll type in BOT. And if I were to zoom back, I can see I've got those two components. Now, there are limitations to what you can actually do with text in Maya. But the first thing I want to do is I want the word bot to be closer to battle. So I'll go over and I'll change the lighting on this, and I'll drag it up so it's closer. And I'll probably change the size of the font so it's closer to my grid size. So I'll change that and drop it down to something quite small. Hitting F on the keyboard, I can now see what I have. And what I want to do now is limit the amount of geometry that's in the width of my text. And if I click on geometry now, I can adjust those aspects. Now, the first thing I'll do is probably add a little bit more to my curve resolution. And curve resolution just adds more detail on the curves of your text so that when we start to apply some of the nonlinear bend tools, it'll maintain its integrity. So this is something you may have to be careful of depending on your CPU. If you feel that your CPU has been giving you a hard time with Maya, particularly in rendering, then maybe you want to leave the default 4. I'm going to bump mine up a bit, and when I do, I can see it's adding more geometry to the curvature of my characters. Now I'm going to put a bit of a bevel on this. I'll scroll down a bit in the attributes for type, and I'm going to choose the kind of rounded bullnose bevel here, and then I can change the amount of the extrude. So I think what I'll do is I'll make it a little bit narrower, and I'll start to round it off with the extrude offset. I'm going to reduce the extrude divisions so that I can play with this text a little bit after I get what I want. And you'll see what we're going to be doing that in a moment. So as I reduce this, there's less geometry. I'll bring it down to 2. I'm choosing the font Arial Black. Now the font you choose is up to you. This will give me something a little blockier, a little bit meatier kind of a font. Next thing I want to do is I want to have the word bot go all the way across the length of the word battle. And this is where we depart from what we can do with an actual text tool. I'll go to my front view, and in my front view, I'll hit W, click on my right mouse, choose face, and I'll select BOT. I'll move the pivot, holding D, to the left-hand corner of the B for bot. Now I'll get my scale tool, and I'll scale that so it goes all the way across and is nested under the word battle. Now I've also increased the width of this, so I'm going to go to my side view, and in my side view I'll just make the width of that the same as the word battle. So if I go to my perspective view now, I should be looking at something similar to this. I'll return to my object mode. I'm going to center the pivot and delete by type history. I'll hit W, hold down X, and snap it to the middle of my viewport. And then hit F to zoom in on it in the center of my perspective view. Now that I have the font set up the way I want, I'm going to start to use some of the deformers. Holding down the space bar, I'm going to go to Deform, Nonlinear, and I'm going to choose Bend. We've used this in the past. It introduces a vertical green line, which is the Bend tool. I want to rotate that so it's horizontal to the text. I'll hit E on the keyboard and Control A to go to my channel box. If I were to start to rotate this on the Z-axis, I can see I can be precise and punch that number in my channel box. Now if I would hit T on the keyboard and drag down on the little blue diamond in the center of that tool, I can bend the text downward. Now when it comes to using these tools, I'm going to use 2 of these anyway. You're welcome to play around with any of them and come up with whatever format you want on this. You'll notice that with all these tools, there's some form of that green line, and all of them have this little diamond feature. And if I were to drag in on the one on the left, you can see the bend is being limited now to the right-hand side. The closer I get to the center diamond element, the less of the bend will be on the left-hand side. And this is pervasive in all of the deform tools, as we will see when we introduce the next one. Now, the thing you want to remember with this is that once you've got something bent in a fashion you want, and you want to add another deformer, you've got to duplicate it, or you've got to delete by type history. One or the other will give you a permanent bend to your geometry. So I'll go ahead and click on delete by type history, and then hold down my space bar, go to deformer again, and I'll go to nonlinear, and I'm going to choose flare. And the flare again has some of the same features. There are those 3 diamonds. You'll see there's a number of other ones. But I want this also to start out horizontally, so I'll hit E, and I'll start to rotate it. And once again, in my channel box, I'll put in 90. Now, if I've hit T on the keyboard to edit, I can now go to one of the ends, and I can start to distort that. So I'm going to come up with something like this. And then I'll delete by type history. I'm going to save. I want this text to be much longer and then taper in the back, so I'm going to scale. I'll go to my side view, and in my side view I'm going to right click and choose vertex. I'll select the vertices at the back, and I'm going to go to my perspective view so I can kind of see what I'm doing as I edit this. I'll start with the move tool, dragging it back, and then I'll hit R on my scale tool, and I'll just taper it. So now I've got a shape more like what I would want. You could edit this further if you chose. Maybe I'll go back to my side view. I'll grab the next row of vertices in. Perhaps I'll move them so that my bend is a little bit more gradual, not so severe. And when I go to my perspective window again, I've got something like this. With the text created, I'm now going to add a material. I'll right click and choose Assign New Material, Arnold, AI Standard, and I'll just make it a yellow. Now I'm going to set my timeline up to animate this. I'm going to go down and set my frame range to 30, as we have been doing for the entire process. And putting my playback head at the beginning of the timeline, I'll go to the channel box, and I'll click on Rotate Y, right click and choose Key Selected. Putting my playback head at frame 30, I'll change the 0 and rotate Y to 360. If I were to play it, I have something like this. Now it's going pretty fast, but we'll be able to slow that down in After Effects. Go back to the beginning of my timeline, and now I'm going to introduce my lights. Holding down spacebar, going to the hotbox, I'll choose Create, Lights, and I'll get a spotlight. Hitting 4 on the keyboard so I can pull it out of the geometry. I'll put it in front and then upward. I'm going to be using 2 lights, so once I set up one, I'll just duplicate it and put it on the other side. Now I want to point this directly at my text, so I'll hit T. And then holding down X on the keyboard, I'll click on the target and drag it down and snap it to the middle of the grid where my text is. I'll go to the light attributes, and I'll make the intensity to start off maybe 20. I'll make the penumbra angle 10. And then I'll open up Arnold, and I'll make the exposure 3.5. Now I'm ready to bring up the Arnold render window to see what I have. Arnold, open Arnold render view, and I'll click on the red triangle to preview what I have so far. I'll put my render view over my viewport, and then going to the attribute, I'll start by increasing the cone angle so that I see the whole text element. Now if this were to rotate through, it gets dark on the sides. The first thing I'm going to do is go to my top view, and in my top view I'll select the light icon, making sure I've hit T. So I'm in the edit mode. I'll drag it over to the right hand side. In my top view I'll hit Command D, and then I'll drag the duplicate light over to the other side. So I'm starting to see something like this. Now it's just a matter of refining the lighting a little bit. In my lighting attributes now, I think I'll probably increase the intensity a bit. And I'm going to drop the shadow severity. So I'll open up the Shadows tab, and I'll drop it down by perhaps a third. And I'll round off the number to maybe 30. For that light, then I'll select the other, and I'll punch in the same amount for that. And I'll drop the severity of its shadow as well. So I'm getting as close as I can. I'll put the camera gate on in my perspective view so I get a better idea of exactly where I'm rendering. I'll make sure I'm at frame 1 and that the text is pretty much right in front of me. If you want to tip it a bit to accentuate the 3D quality, you're welcome to do that as well. I'm going to run the play blast on it just to make sure that nothing's getting cut off in the animation process. Going to Windows, Play Blast, the attributes, H.264 is fine, and I've got the scale as 1. I'll just hit apply on this, and I'll just play that, and everything is on screen, so we're good to go. Now I'll set up my frame renders. Going to the attributes, the top of the user interface, the little Hollywood clapboard with the blue gear in it, to the left of the hypershade. I'll click. I'll name my file. I'll change my image format to a TIFF. I'll change my frame animation extension to name _ for After Effects. And then I'll extend my frame range from 1 to 30. And I'll close it out. Holding down the space bar to get my hotbox, I'll go to Render, Render Sequence, Attributes, and through Output File Location, I'll send this file to where I want to save it in my project folder, and then I'll choose Select and click on Render Sequence. That will give me the TIFF sequence that I will bring into After Effects and composite on the star background.